Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast. And today we're going to be reviewing Ghost in the Shell. What was the name of the director, Dakota?
Mamoru Oshii, or I don't know if it's Oshii or Oshii. I don't know how you say it exactly. I used to say Oshii, and I heard somebody say Oshii, and so now I don't know, but I'm a huge fan of his in any case. But this was my introduction was Ghost in the Shell. So
yeah, it's released in 1995. I believe we mentioned Ghost in the Shell quite a bit in the Johnny Mnemonic video. Yeah, because that was also 95. It's like cyberpunk. This is obviously anime, both kind of templates to like the Matrix that would come 4 years later. So before we get into it, I would like to point out that we now have a Patreon. So check the link in the description for that. Also check out our Spotify and our YouTube. If you're on one or the other, try the other. They both have their uses,
Right.
But yeah, let's just get into it. So we are set in the year 2029 they call it Port City, right?
My approach to this has been I'm trying to ignore everything that I know externally, but I'm trying to just remember what information the movie gives us. And it's actually very little. I don't think it ever explicitly states the name of the city. I would assume it's Japan, but then I know that it's borrowing heavily from Hong Kong's kind of architecture, and incorporating that. So I don't think it ever says, but I know from external information that it is Japan, but I don't know if they even ever say that, in the film.
According to Google, it is Japan. We're just not specified if it's Tokyo or if just all of Japan is a city at this point. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, kind of like the sprawl from Johnny Mnemonic or so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I do know that they were. Yeah, visually they took away from Hong Kong. That's what a lot of those images are modeled after, more than say Japan. So
just like one of the opening scrolls is that corporate networks fill the earth with electronic communication lines, and there's still different nations and still different races. So we're at this point where technology hasn't completely enveloped the human race, right, but we're right to that precipice. You know what I mean? Everything is kind of just clawing together at this point.
Well, yeah. I mean, the movie opens on it's very kind of overt that we're still not getting along, right? This isn't a super civilized future. In fact, the movie almost kind of mocks that with the Major's line, that he's like, oh, we're a peace-loving democracy. Oh, I'm getting ahead, but and she's like, of course, and the I think of In Bruges, the dumb bullets that make your head explode or whatever like that. So, it's not super civilized. We're still definitely, there are ethnic barriers, different nations, political intrigue. That's all still very much a thing in this world. So, but yeah.
And we're introduced to this character right behind me, who is Major Motoko Kusanagi. Kusanagi?
Yep.
And she's basically this badass cop that is cybernetic, but still has a consciousness that we can perceive. And just real quick, because this isn't a spoiler or anything, but the title of the movie, Ghost in the Shell, refers to the consciousness or the soul in the body.
Yeah. Everything the movie's about is in that title, I suppose, really.
Yeah.
So they use the word ghost, but that basically just means the soul, the essence, the conscious, whatever makes you, which is sort of still intangible even within the movie. I mean, it's kind of what it's about is, part of it is trying to define that. And it ultimately, as it is kind of, well, you can't define it, but a ghost and it is your soul, your essence, who you are. And then the shell is, the cybernetic body or whatever, so and there's definitely a feeling of disconnect between those two things that becomes kind of this existential crisis for the main character throughout the whole film. So, I mean, and then who was it that whole Ghost in the Machine thing? I mean, did that come from Isaac Asimov or I mean, I forget who, but that whole concept. Okay, well, it's kind of probably a play on that. It's so, what, I don't know.
I believe at this point too, it's almost more rare to have a total human. Like everyone kind of has some kind of cybernetic, trait.
That's something I try to like. I don't know for sure. Like, certainly for Section 9, like, I mean, they're like everybody's been augmented except for Togusa. The guy with the mullet. He still has some augmentations, a brain augmentation, but I was trying to keep my eye on it, but there are doubles. There are people with the same body. So there's this interlude in the middle of the film that when I'd first seen it, I was kind of like, I didn't know if that was a metaphor or if she's actually seeing a double. And then like this time watching it, I saw that the chief.
I have his name somewhere here.
He's in like the command center, and we see that there are two characters that have the same body. So, these bodies are streamlined and manufactured, and so I don't think. As far as how many people on the streets have augmentations, I don't know, but it's kind of implied that Section 9 has access to the most high end, technology that there is.
There's like this really like cool like opening scene, kind of it leads into the opening credits, which are also cool, but where Kasunagi jumps off a building and turns on like this camouflage that makes her almost completely invisible, and assassinates a police target, and then like slowly glides down, and then we go into the opening credits, which I thought that was a really, really cool way to start the movie.
Yeah, it's a really iconic opening. Yeah, so and then we get the kind of green text, which the Matrix kind of borrowed, right?
Yeah, so the green text of binary code. Into the titles, and that's like, it will as soon as you see it as an audience, you will think of the Matrix. Yeah.
Right.
And then Aramaki and a diplomat meet, and they kind of like sort of discuss have some like sort of like crime mumbo jumbo that kind of like is sort of like like maybe the second time I would watch this movie, I'd catch on to it a little bit more.
That's the thing. So that's why I kind of tried to bear in mind too, is that like I think a lot of people think more about the philosophical ideas that are raised by the film than the actual like plot line, which is kind of confusing, right? I mean, so
which is okay. There's a lot of movies where if you actually read the text, you'd get a little buried down in the nitty gritty. But that's why it takes a great director to like make the whole thing make sense anyway. You know what I mean? And that's what this movie does.
I don't want to go all, but like, so I did read the graphic novel when it, because I was so in love with Ghost in the Shell, and like it's really convoluted and really confusing, and like below everything is like an asterisk. It's like, this is, the exploding bullets, it's whatever millimeter, blah, 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 blah. Like, he's doing that constantly. It's overwhelming. Like, he's hitting you with information on every bloody page, and I think it kind of loses its essence. And then, so I think Oshii just trims the fat. He found the heart of that work. And I mean, the Major, for one thing, is very different from her graphic novel counterpart. I mean, she's kind of like a bubblegum mall rat type, which makes no sense for like a trained killer, I mean, I always thought that was kind of weird. Then there's the anime that everybody loves, the show. And my main issue with that, I finally pinpointed my problem with it, is that you have an answering Major, not a questioning Major. I mean, which makes sense. I mean, as a cop, she's gonna, that feels more realistic for that type of person. But that's exactly why this movie is so fascinating, because we have somebody who isn't sure of themselves. In the anime, she's oh, criminal scum. It's like a Saturday morning cartoon. At the end of every episode, she's dismissive of, here in this one, like I think it's a great template for a show. I mean, it would really fit a procedural, but I think it should, like, the overall arc should be that everything is reflection of her internal conflict, and she doesn't have that in the show. And she just has dismissive answers like, oh, they're just a loser living in a dream world. It's like, I mean, it was
in that series, the main character isn't the Truman in the Truman Show,
right?
The main character is one of the neighbors or whatever.
It's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, she just I mean, that's like I said, I mean, she has answers, not questions, and it's a totally different character. I mean, they gave her a backstory and all that. But it wasn't nearly as interesting. I think the other thing though is that she's running around. She's wearing a fucking pink like bustier, but it's just ridiculous. I mean, she's running around in like a thong and a busted hosiery. It like no tact, like it just makes no fucking sense. And like. I mean, the major in this one's running around naked, but there's a reason for it. I mean, she feels disconnected, I think, from her body. Like, it's just a tool. She doesn't feel any sense of modesty because she doesn't identify with her body. It's just a tool, like a gun. It's,
And just like you said, it's because she, her body's a tool. I also don't think her camouflage works with any clothes on.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing. So it has some interesting ideas, but I feel like this film says more than any of that shit does. And like an hour and 20-30 minutes,
Yeah, it's a pretty short film. But the main takeaway to take away from like some of the, political and like I suppose like thinky kind of dialogue is like, at least this first scene is just take away what they say about the puppet master. So that's when we get our first introduction to the puppet master. Basically, you got to know that the puppet master hacks into people's ghosts, and they hack into people's ghosts because I believe when the puppet master's real body was killed, the puppet master was able to transfer its ghost onto the web or onto like cyberspace,
So there's like a foreign minister whose translator has been hacked, and so they're trying to like basically trace the hack back to its root, to get to the puppet master. So then that puts us onto a couple of garbage men doing rounds around the city.
The sequence kind of begins with Kasunagi and Tosuga, who's like, not her direct partner like Bato, but the other basically police.
The other thing is that he's the new guy, so.
They're basically in the car, and there was one quote from that conversation that I pulled from. It said, Kasunagi is explaining, I believe, that when you over specialize, you breed in weakness.
Right.
I forgot the exact context of the weight of what they were.
Well, it was he was asking why'd you want me on your task force, basically, and she was saying that, like, because everybody else is augmented heavily, and he's, other than this brain augmentation that allows him to communicate, not telepathically, but they don't have to speak, they can communicate, which is also probably helpful for the animation. They don't have to animate the mouse, but so he's like, why did you want me? And she's like, well, you've got like an impeccable record, but also because of your human qualities, that'll perhaps allow us to think in a different way. Because I forget exactly how she puts it, but basically, like you said, the idea is that if you over specialize, if everybody's super augmented and they can all, then they could be exploited. And then I think that materializes at the end of the film. He's mostly useless, but at the end, at the start, like he has to arrest the trash men or whatever. But then at the end, he's the one that figures out the whole pressure sensor thing, so he's just thinking in a different I guess in a different way.
Right. He thinks in a more impulsive way, a more, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and then yeah, he's the other conversation that he's using this antiquated old cop, revolver. Anyway, but yeah, it's a revolver, and then she's talking about like automatic weapons, and he's all worried they're going to jam up, and she's saying get over it, and I mean, so it's just a difference. I mean, but they're yeah, the old ways, the new ways, that whole thing. I don't know.
And weirdly enough, this is like a super, like, it'll be like a 1 second tangent, but it is pretty far off. But like that quote kind of makes me think about sports sometimes, because sports, like anything else, kind of evolve and then like kind of come back a little bit in like two directions. So if you think about basketball, like nowadays, like, and for like the last 10 years or so, people have started like even if you don't know much about basketball, 3-pointers and dunks, right?
Yeah.
So basically in the last 10 years, there have been like more 3-point shooters than ever. So like everyone has to be able to shoot 3-pointers if you're even going to play, pretty much. But sometimes, and this is like the player Giannis Antetokounmpo that the Bucks have, who they just won the championship. But like he's just a fucking monster at dunking. Like you cannot stop him, and everyone else is just like a small shooter now. Mm-hmm. So now he's broken the code the other way. So it's kind of that like the character was saying, and you were explaining, like the over specialization.
Oh yeah, nobody knows how to handle this guy, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no one can handle him basically.
All right.
Because everyone else is because usually tall people can't shoot all that well. Mm-hmm. But like if you're but like at the NBA level, if you're like 6'3" rather than like 7 foot, you can like shoot.
Yeah.
So there's just a bunch of little shooters out there, and then there's just a 7-footer that is really fast and really big that's just killing people.
Right.
So the garbage men scene comes in, and one of the characters is talking about how like, oh, he's getting divorced from his wife and this and that. But it's really after this car chase, and they basically end up getting caught. It's discovered that like that's like an artificial memory that I believe the puppet master gave him.
I mean, there are these two trash workers. One of them is hacking into, what would you call those? I mean, phone booths, I guess. I mean, I guess that's one thing that hasn't really endured. Because he's trying to ghost hack his wife's brain, he says, because she's just suddenly decided to divorce him. She's taking his little girl or whatever, who thinks that he's the one cheating on her mom or whatever. He has just no idea why she's divorcing him or whatever. He suspects she's having an affair or whatever. But he's new on the job, and he shows the guy a picture of his little girl. The guy doesn't look because he's not interested. He's like, I don't give a shit about it. I want to look at pictures of other people's kids. The major hacks into the whatever trash companies, like their routes. Like she's so that tips off the company itself. They call up the vehicle because they're wondering why the cops want to know the routes, which tips him off. He's like, oh shit, they found out. And he learned how to do this, he says, from a guy that heard his sob story in a bar and taught him how to hack from different points along the route so that it couldn't be easily traced. So then he's like, oh shit, I got to warn the guy because he's helping me out. So they sprint ahead, which tips off Section 9 that like, okay, they know what, they know that we're on, or they know we're onto them. And then, yeah, basically we encounter this other guy along the route who's hacking into a phone booth. He shoots the shit out of the garbage truck or whatever. They survive. Section 9 closes in. It turns into a big shootout. He's using HP ammo, hyper fucking something, whatever. All right, it blows, whatever. So yeah, it becomes an action scene, like you said. But yeah, at the tail end of that, the major chases this guy down and gets the better of him ultimately. Togusa arrests the garbage men. And then that lands us into the next scene that you were describing. So,
but yeah, they basically discover that like the puppet master was creating this guy's memories, and he doesn't have a wife, and he's basically just been working for him like a drone.
Yeah, it's like Blade Runner, the implanted memories, and so
yeah, and then that leads us to question like what is a ghost? If like memories can mimic what a ghost is, mm-hmm. like you could have a totally seemingly conscious shell that never had a go. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, no, it's a really depressing idea because this guy loved his wife, he loved his kid, and they don't fucking exist. And so you start thinking about it, it's like, is that all love is?
Is all consciousness just a series of memories? You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay, and then this next scene is, I think, one of the more visually, for me, the one that sticks visually the most is when she goes swimming.
Oh yeah, that it sticks in my. That's why I just said, yeah, it sticks in my mind a lot too. Yeah.
Yep. Boto is on a boat, and she's swimming down in the bay or the port. It's very pretty, very, very like well done animation and art and artistic, and like she's just kind of like contemplating what she saw like earlier that day, and like kind of like what we've been talking about, where it's like, what's consciousness, what's this, what's that. She gets up on the boat and she starts having a conversation with Bato about technology. And one of the quotes I pulled from that one that really stuck out to me is, if man realizes technology is in reach, he achieves it. So whether it's going to lead to a good thing or a bad thing, or inhumanity or humanity, if they see a technology that's like within reach, they're going to do it, and then they're going to go keep climbing the rope.
Right. Which I think as we've seen is not always, like I everybody thinks that like progress is linear and forward. Like I think a lot of this has been a big step aside at best, like where it's just been a whole lot of nothing. But yeah, a lot of that conversation, she's talking about how a lot of this was sci-fi once upon a time. And I think that's how a lot of people feel now. Anybody that was growing up, about our age, the movies, like a lot of this is actually starting to happen. It's modeled itself after sci-fi movies. And that's why it's like Ghost in the Shell might not feel as relevant today, just because so many movies in probably the past 10 years have actually started to talk about these things. But in 95, and even when I watched it, like in 2006, 7, around there, like, it was hugely ahead of its time, I thought,
she changes out of her swimming gear, and that's when we get like Bato.
Oh yeah, again, he's being kind of like modest and looking away,
yeah. So like the point that you brought up, yeah, like he might be like the only character that's introduced that like kind of cares about her nudity, or
yeah, I don't know if that was to kind of stifle his argument, or like if she just, again, doesn't. I think the idea is that she just doesn't relate to her own body. She doesn't feel a need to cover up. She doesn't see the issue, So, but it does shut him up in any case, because he's criticizing her for being reckless by diving, because she's a cyborg and she could sink, if anything goes wrong with the floaters, is the idea. So, and yeah, then they start to, I think a lot of the central ideas of the film come out in that scene.
And then I have it written down word for word. They hear a voice, and I believe it originates, like, I think it's like a telepathic thing that they both experience, and it comes from her.
Yeah,
but she doesn't know like how. Real quick, regardless, the quote word for word, and then we can talk about kind of where it originates. Is what we see now is like a dim image in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face.
If you watch the Japanese version, the subtitles are a little different, I think. And actually, I think they're a little clumsier than the English version in that scene. But the one thing that became clear was that they're actually, the one thing that was an improvement is that they're because I think this was a mistranslation, is that the biblical phrase, looking through through a looking glass darkly or whatever that I from Corinthians, I think is what they're referencing there. I think that's how it's written out in the Japanese like the subtitles. So so it's a biblical quote, and then there's one more at the end of the film about, you know, how's it go? I had a use for childish things, but no more, or something like that at the very end of the film. So there's two biblical quotes. I just think that whoever was translating it didn't know that, and so
the translation is just not. It just doesn't quite get it across.
Right. Well, I think they just I just think they didn't know, you know, and so they So okay, but yeah, it's a biblical quote. So where it originates. So yeah, I don't know if it's her unconsciousness or if like it's like when I first watched it, I mean, I thought it was the puppet master like hacking into her, you know, or something.
That's what I thought it was too.
So
but like it would still be originating, like it would be originating from the puppet master, but it'd be coming through her.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, because they're all linked and they communicate that way. You know, like they don't have to speak. They can communicate with what would you call that? I mean,
it's telepathy, but
yeah, like, telepathically, basically. Yeah. So well, yeah, I guess that happens. And then Bateau questions if that was her or not. And then she looks at the cityscape, her hair blows, and then we get to this interlude, like kind of like a montage sequence, I guess, that kind of very clearly.
I love the montages in this movie where it's just like kind of cityscape. It seems like filler, but it's just fucking beautiful. Yeah. And I love it when movies just take the time to breathe.
So I watched Akira, and I think that was the one I watched first. I mean, when I watched these, I rented from like a video store, so that should tell you how long ago. So I can't remember for sure. But when I watched Akira, it was such a revelation to me because anime that I had seen would have been on like, you know, Toonami or whatever. I don't fucking know, Cartoon Network, I think, you know. And you had like Street Racer, right? Where the guy's just like, he's sitting there for 5 solid minutes. And I couldn't take that. Akira is busy as hell. Like, I mean, there's never a minute where something isn't happening. I'm just like, oh my God. I mean, the animation is just beautiful. And so like, I'm not like one of these people that can like, it's using this many cells and blah, blah, blah. I don't know all that. But I can tell you when I look at Akira, I know that like, holy shit, that's beautiful. You know, and so Ghost in the Shell is like a close second. It's not as busy as Akira, but I also think that that's a deliberate decision because I'm like, it takes its time to really let its themes and ideas sink into you. And so I don't, you know, I mean, it isn't all spectacle, nonstop. But I don't think that's lazy animation is what I'm trying to say. I mean, it's not as impressive or busy as Akira, but nothing is. And I think here it's a deliberate decision.
And it's actually probably some of the more difficult animation in some ways that they have in the movie, as far as like, you know, getting the lighting of the buses right and things like that, because like all that's like really beautiful. And like I mean, we both explained it, but like it is just really important sometimes, especially if you have like I think it's good for any movie to do that, but especially
moments to breathe, right? I mean,
especially if you have a really talky movie or whatever, just to think about what the hell just happened, you know, like put the pieces. Why does the garbage man relate to what she heard? Why does, you know, the first couple scenes relate to the garbage man, and like that kind of thing. And then, you know, where this movie might be going. I definitely don't think it's lazy, and it's just good directing is what it is. And I mean, sometimes like, I'm sure like some people can go overboard with it, but like, I mean, more often than not, though, I've honestly found that like the more it is implemented, the more it feels right.
If they know, it's a tough line. That could be a whole conversation. But I mean, some like I've seen, some people, Terrence Malick has been too much. I think it's fine. I haven't seen a lot of indie stuff though in the past 10 years like that I'm watching is like, it's too self-indulgent. Like it just goes on and on and on. And I'm like, you have to have substance. You have to, that can be great if people are invested, but if they're not, like you can't take that time,
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm very much the opposite of how I used to be. I used to be a lot more patient, and like I could sit through that sort of thing, but like now I have a lot more respect for something that leaves you wanting more, that's really concise, that can cut a scene like Park Chan Wook, for like, those are just brutal cuts, and like, I mean, and yet I respect it. Like, I mean, it's also, it's not just about its tone and a bunch of other things. It's not just about being concise, but here, yeah, the interlude, Kenji Kawai's soundtrack. I mean, he's one of like my favorite composers. He did the soundtrack for Dark Water, but he's scored all of Mamoru Oshii's stuff. I mean, he's just done a lot of work, but I love his music. And here, it's the same track as that opening, the making of the cyborg sequence or whatever. And then I think, I don't know if it plays anywhere else in the film. I think it's just the start in this sequence, but maybe it plays again. I don't know. Maybe at the very end. But there are a couple of things. So yeah, she sees her doppelganger, which we talked about during that sequence. And then it's a stupid observation, but anyway, but there are mannequins, and I think that reflects the idea. The whole musical interlude ends on some mannequins in a storefront, and I think that's how the Major sees her body. She sees, and then the sequel, Ghost in the Shell 2: Innocence, which I brought up, but I didn't really talk about. The whole idea of that are like sex dolls, and so dolls and it plays around with that idea a lot. It's a central concept. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and also I noticed that a lot in Japanese anime, that like there's a lot of talk, like I don't know if this is some cultural thing I don't get, but it shows up all the time. Dolls. I don't know why. I like watching Neon Genesis Evangelion. There's a character in there that doesn't want to feel like she's a doll, but yeah, so like dolls come up all the time. I don't know culturally the significance, but
so we're going through this like kind of dreamy city montage, which we think is beautiful, and like good timing, a good time to take your time as a movie, because they load us with a lot of information in the first half.
I don't know if it's exactly the midway point, like time-wise, but it feels like it. It feels like they're very, two halves.
Right. Sometimes it's interesting how like act structures work. Sometimes they're harder to, like, sometimes a first act is really short, and sometimes a second act. Like lots of times it's like the first half hour is the first act, last half hour is the third, everything in between is the second. So yeah, we're going through this, get these beautiful city shots, time for the audience to breathe because of all the information we just got. And then we see this big truck hit what we see as, just a woman in the street, a naked woman in the street. She's like severed in two, but she's got very cybernetic, like almost entirely cybernetic body. I think entirely, right?
Yeah.
They get called into the department or whatever to look at it, because to sum up this scene, they think they found a ghost in this body where there's no human element at all. So it was never something that was born. It was just created, and now it has a consciousness in it. And they think it could be the puppet master or whatever. Either way, or if it's just an original, ghost, like that's like a mind fuck. And they have the scene in the elevator where they kind of explain things a little further that I like.
Yeah, I mean, Kusanagi's talking. Well, I mean, I think she's for the first time expressing her inner conflict with Bato in the elevator, where she's like, she's questioning her whole identity. I mean, it's come up throughout for one thing. I mean, which just is bizarre. But I mean, if you work for Section 9, I mean, you have to have like these, in exchange, they have these cybernetic bodies. And, if you ever retire, well, then you have to give up your cybernetic body, and then there's really nothing left. She's wondering, to get at the heart of it, maybe not very eloquently, but just that she's wondering if she even exists. Like, I mean, if she's starting to wonder if she's even human. you know, or you
She's
know,
getting paranoid by her ghost is kind of like the note that I wrote.
Yeah, she's like, I mean, how do I know? Yeah, that I mean, and the other thing that's interesting about that is the movie's very ambiguous about. I mean, we don't know her origin story. I mean, we see the creation of a cyborg in the opening credits. We don't. I mean, I suppose we don't even know if that's her body. We don't know when that takes place. We don't know. I mean, there's like her, which again is another thing that the show kind of messes up because we do get a backstory and it becomes a little more. It's not totally concrete, but seems more likely that she's human. Well, whatever, she's having an existential crisis, and that comes forth in the elevator sequence, I guess. She's not content to be treated human. That's not enough. That's not affirmation enough of her humanity, you know? Whereas Batao's content to kind of leave it at that, you know? Like, I mean, he's kind of dismissive. I mean, well, you see that throughout the film, you know, really.
Like their dynamic is interesting because it's kind of like the dynamic that you see with a lot of people where even if Bato sees all the evidence that, you know, his consciousness could be completely manufactured from the beginning or whatever, he doesn't see the value in learning that or believing that because like that's just like not the way of his not his way of life. So he doesn't have the place for it in his mind. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, it's not really of utility, which I mean, which is, I mean, it's also interesting. I mean, the Major is somebody who is kind of utilitarian too. Like, I mean, she sees her body as a tool. We see a room, and I mean, it really, you get the kind of like the Russ Cole thing from True Detective, where you get the sense it's just a place to sleep. You know, I mean, so she should probably think that way, but she doesn't, which I think is what's so interesting about her character. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like, you know, why are we here? All those things that central question, whatever. People don't ask themselves that on a daily basis because there are no answers. It's kind of pointless, and that's kind of how he thinks. But she can't help but to think that way, I guess. So,
and it's almost it's against human programming to even question it because it's so hard to explain, as it's hard to explain right now.
Right. Right.
So we're living Ghost in the Shell just by reviewing it. They learn some more stuff about the Puppet Master at this point. A little more backstory, like it's basically Section 9 or at least some police force that caused the Puppet Master to have to dive into a cyber body.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just a big bullshit story. But yeah, I mean, that Section 6 provides the Section 9 because they want to acquire the body here. So they're just saying that the Puppet Master was a person that was killed, forced into the web, and then forced into this body. And so the chief is content with that. And then there's a power outage, I think, or something, right? And then the doll starts speaking and declares itself a living being, though it never had an original body. It was never a person. It's Project 50, whatever the fuck.
When the Puppet Master starts talking, it explains that DNA is a program and life is a system of memory, and that's basically proof of existence. And it's Project 2501. Oh, okay. And basically explains, hey, I'm a fucking living entity.
Right. And what created, I think he says, in the sea of information that is the web or the internet, right? I mean, and so like actually, I mean, that's a lot like what Google's doing. I think about that. Yeah, but it was created in the sea of information, and you know, and declares itself a living entity, and you know, wants political asylum as a living entity. So you know, and yeah, so that's quite a declaration. You know, everybody's kind of like, what the fuck? But
okay, so then the power outage comes, and then
and somebody sneaks the doll out of the body out of there, you know.
Yeah, and it's Section
6 ultimately.
And it's on this car. It's in this car, and the new guy tracks it with like a tracking bullet.
Because he had his own suspicions earlier, you know, that we talked about. Yeah. So
yeah, and then they have a fun little quip with Bato, I think, because because like I think he was like, yeah, my gun's not so bad now, is it? And he's like, well, if it's an automatic, he could have got like 7 in there.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and then it's also explained that the project had started a year before they looked for the puppet master. I forgot the exact significance about that, but the company, I believe, knew that it was going to be a problem before it became a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the whole idea of the puppet master was that he was supposed to. I mean, it was supposed to be an instrument of all this political intrigue. He was supposed to, I mean, basically hack into foreign, whatever, countries, I guess politicians, ghosts and all that, like, and accumulate all this, data and knowledge. Or, I mean, he's an information gathering thing, I think, but somewhere in there he became self-aware, and, that's where we're at now. And then they lost track of him, and, he's a runaway, basically. Runaway project that they can't let the information get out. I mean, that he even exists, just because of how sensitive by nature of his existence he is, so all the classified information, he's privy to. So but so he gets abducted. Togusa hits car with a tracker.
Okay, they basically catch the car, and then there's a shootout with Katsunagi and like this robot turret.
Oh yeah, like a big battle tank thing.
Yeah, and that's like a really like action-packed scene. Very well done, and it gets to one of the more visually it's objectively visually interesting scene of like her trying to pull it apart, and like you see that her muscles are like flexing and growing in inhuman ways.
Yeah, it's that, and then the tissue and sinew like just starts to rip and shred and break apart. It's probably
she literally rips her arm off, and
trying to rip open the battle tank.
But then Bato basically blows the thing up with some kind of rocket propelled.
Which again shows like a certain degree of disregard for her body. Like it is a tool. It's, and then,
she's a fucking can opener at that point.
Right. Yeah. Can opener. Right. That's how she sees it. So, very nearly dies. I think the tank, starts to crush her head. But Bato shows up, shoots the shit out of it with a anti-material cannon rifle thing, and saves her at the last minute. And so then she's still determined to merge with the puppet master, which is in a car below this battle tank, and in this museum, the flooded museum or whatever, which she does. But then Bato says he's going to pull the fucking plug on her if anything looks like it's going wrong. Because I guess we left that out. She's been determined to connect with the puppet master basically throughout this whole thing. She's been fascinated by it. And as it turns out, he's been quite fascinated with her, so then. Yeah,
so they literally set the bodies next to each other and like have like cables going in. Also, like for the record, like they have like 4 like cables in the back that are very similar to like what you see in the Matrix when you're actually in the Matrix. There's like to literally plug people in, and I
suppose people might not even know what the fuck we're talking about since the iPhones phased out all headphone jacks and shit like that. But there was a time,
But yeah, so like you were saying, she dives in at this point, and then the puppet master talks through her shell, and then says that he chose her, like you were explaining, like they both have interest in each other. Puppet master explains that he's self-aware and he wants to merge with her, bear children into the net is basically how he explains it.
So it's kind of interesting. Like he sees the dynamics as being symbiotic. Like she has something that she can offer to him, and then he has something that he can offer to her, and so symbiotic relationship.
And then there's like kind of like next level stuff that they explain, like they'll become part of all things, stuff like that. Just like like crazy powerful, like sentient, ultra sentient shit. And then the shells explode.
Well, because there's a sniper overhead that lines up. There are dot sights on both. I think, the Puppet Master's body and the Major's. Bateau blocks the shot with his arm, but her head still comes off, but perfectly severed, so the head itself isn't damaged. So I guess whatever's most vital, the essence is in the head, same as with a person, I guess. And then I guess I guess the next scene would be we wake up to the Major.
And we wake up. She's like a little girl in a little girl's shell, and Bato is hiding her because I'm assuming
I like it because I think that's kind of a visual metaphor. Like, I mean, so through their marriage, they've created a child. It's kind of how I see that. But it's also kind of funny because then we get that line about leaving behind childish things, the biblical phrase, like she's graduated into adulthood in a sense, or whatever the hell that looks like from this weird merging of AI and human. So I mean, I just a lot of interesting imagery happening there. But she's a little girl's body at Bato's place, hidden away. Nobody knows that she survived this event.
Right. Bato's doing this all like underground, basically. And Bato also explains like, well, it's the best shell I could find.
Right. Which is kind of raises, I suppose, disturbing questions. I mean, with like little girl bodies and shit. I don't know.
Maybe they're more plentiful. Yeah, that's a fair point. But basically, the end of the movie is that they merged, and that's kind of the crux by the end.
Well, and so he's kind of, I think he questions her like, I mean, are you still the Major? And she's like, I'm neither the Major nor the Puppet Master, and we don't really get more than that, but it's, I mean, she still feels some degree of, what would you call it? I mean,
she has memories, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, she still addresses Bateau warmly, almost. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so there is, I guess, a seemingly human component to her still there.
And there's nothing like overly malicious that seems about her, that like the Puppet Master was evil the whole time or something.
Right. I mean, because he definitely doesn't like the idea we see of the Major being overridden by the Puppet Master or whatever, like I think he tries to pull the plug during that sequence, but it's too late. So once he starts talking about merging with her, he's like, oh, okay, yeah, fuck this, but it's, so, because I mean, he definitely has an affection for her. I mean, whatever, it seems to be pretty platonic, but how does it end? It's like, I mean, huh?
Doesn't she just kind of I thought she just kind of walked out of the apartment.
Yeah, she walks out of his place, looks over the city, and then says the net is which, I mean, it's kind of like it like the city itself is a network in a way, and like humans are, the electrons. I don't fucking know.
Isn't there a Lars von Trier film where like he kind of points out that like computer chips look like cities or something like that?
That's probably where I'm getting that. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Point being, like, computer chips kind of look like cities, so that might be what you're getting
streets at. And I mean, streets are pathways, I mean, I think that's kind of an idea here. I don't know, it's an interesting idea. Whether it's there or not, I don't know.
But it basically ends on that note, and now going into impact on society, very, very, like, I mean, it's like probably only like the third anime that I've watched through completion. So like very, very famous anime. Like, it's very accessible, as what we were saying. Is like there are a few others that could like lead you down that road, but we're not even down that road yet, like to that point. To the point of a lot of people, but it is a very good anime. It's our first of like any kind of animated film that we've reviewed.
Right. Well, I forgot to mention, I mean, it's also notable for being, a lot of people praise the incorporation of 3D like CGI in this film. It only really exists in like the city layout, you know, when we're seeing like these sort of coordinates or whatever. I mean, but yeah, it's pretty seamless. You know, I know Disney was kind of playing around with it at the time with like I think Pocahontas. They had like CGI rafts or not rafts,
or like leaves during Color of the Wind or something.
That sounds but Ghost in the Shell, I mean, it is really seamlessly integrated. I mean, it's not distracting, it's not showy, which is I think the big frustration with, because I brought up Ghost in the Shell 2, not to be confused with Ghost in the Shell 2.0, which is where he goes in and he does a George Lucas and reworks a lot of these famous scenes with CGI imagery, which look good. I mean, they're good, but they're so like it just rips you out of it. They're not well integrated at all. I mean, and they should have been like a special feature or something on a DVD. I mean, they pull you out of it completely. Anyway.
And that's the original.
Yeah, so cool. Without the CGI imagery. But yeah, at the time it was a big thing because people wanted an HD Ghost in the Shell and they got 2.0 and they weren't happy about that. So but now that we don't have to suffer 2.0, I think it's worth a look if you want to just re-experience the movie in a new way. I mean, I've seen it so many times, but
yeah, like those things should be supplemental. You know what I mean?
Right, that's how I feel. Like it should have been an extra on the disc.
Same with Star Wars. You should like that's why I really like the Blade Runner because like
it offers all
like 5 versions of it.
Even the shitty original theatrical cut that Scott himself hates. You know, like I mean, it's there. Because that was somebody's experience. That was their,
you know, and that's, you know, like it might be valuable for people to watch it, you know, even though like I don't think it's going to be anybody's favorite. No, but like it would still be valuable.
But it's just great that it includes all of it, you know, that you have that option, you know. I really bloody wish Star Wars.
So yeah, it had a big impact on society.
Oh, you go
definitely some inspiration of the Matrix. We've mentioned that. Definitely some parallel thinking with Johnny Mnemonic, which came out the same exact year, and then you know took some inspiration from Blade Runner, but you know that's the way it works. Like even movies that people think are like super original that were made in the 70s, well, like Akira, have some roots in the 40s, you know, and then back and back and back. Like that's. It's an ecosystem of film, so it's not necessarily like a knock. I'm just saying.
No, I
inspired that. You know what I mean?
A lot owes itself to Blade Runner. I mean, really, just the whole genre. I would say. I mean, you know, and then in written fiction, I guess Neuromancer, but certainly in film, yeah, Blade Runner's yeah.
And then speaking of that, let's get into recommendations.
Okay, Skycrawlers, another Mamoru Oshii thing, struggling with identity and whatever and memory. And but then if you like the more like you know, political intrigue and tactical whatever blah blah blah, Pat Labor 2, which came out in 93, Oshii directed, and that's a really good one, but not the same animation style. But then I have to say Jinro, the Wolf Brigade, which he wrote, he didn't direct, but one of the lead animators from Ghost in the Shell directed. I mean, nobody talks about it, but that's. Yeah, as far as animation, I mean, I'd have to put it in my top 3, and I just think it's one of the greatest fucking contemplations on violence and war. I mean, it's a powerful film, and I definitely recommend anybody watch that.
All right, and then some of my recommendations are things that we've talked about before. My number 1 recommendation would be Blade Runner. Yeah. I also. As far as I've found, just a quick like unboxing. This is like my favorite version of Blade Runner that I have found.
Have everything? It has like the work print. I haven't seen the work print.
Oh, I don't know if it has a work print. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, it has a work print cut, which I always wanted to see. Like, because it's got the director's cut, which came on like VHS. Yeah, that one. Yeah, I don't own it. I wish I fucking did.
It's glossy. It's pretty. I think the definitive one is the final cut. That's right here.
I have that. I have
and then we still have what is and then disc 2 is actually Dangerous Days, the making of, because the making of for Blade Runner fucking bonkers. And then we have disc 2.
Actually, I've seen Dangerous Days. So I'm trying to think, but I've never seen the work print, and you would own the work print. That's the one cut I've never seen.
Okay.
I've seen the director's cut, the final cut. I have not seen the work print. I'd love to have.
So disc 3 has the US theatrical, which has the bad voiceover.
Yeah, and the fucking shit ending.
The international theatrical cut and the 1992 director's cut, which is better than the original, but not quite the final cut.
Mm-hmm.
And then disc 4 has the enhancement archive.
Okay.
Which I don't think I've watched that.
That must be a bunch of special features or something.
I think so. Yeah. And then disc 5 is the work print, and I hadn't seen that one yet.
That's the one I haven't seen either.
And then Blade Runner 2049, I think out of the heap of sequels that we've had in the last couple, the last decade really, of let's get this old asshole out here and reclaim the movie that he did back in the 80s that was popular because we're not original anymore. This is legitimately good on its own. It doesn't touch Blade Runner, but it's good. I think on its own.
I have a complicated, so I saw it in the theater, and when I first watched it, I'm like, this is probably the best sci-fi movie I've seen of the decade. I'm a little harsher now because I don't know. I'm being unfair to it because it couldn't have done anything it couldn't have done anything better. If it had been bolder, it would have perhaps tarnished the legacy of the original, but because it isn't, it also just kind of feels like it doesn't say anything.
I see what you mean. It kind of knows its place.
Which I'm grateful for. It's just impossible. I'm grateful it didn't fuck it up. It didn't fuck it up, but it also didn't add as much as me. I don't know what it could have done.
It didn't take massive risks. Okay, and then I would suggest Inception, because I
got that too. Yeah,
because that's it's a popular movie. A lot of people have seen it, but it's also one of those things that debates consciousness and whatnot. Obviously, The Matrix. We've talked about this a lot throughout this video, and also Johnny Mnemonic. We've talked about that too as well. If you're just looking for cyberpunk and less thinky stuff, check out Dread and check out our video on it. And then this is a lot of left field, but you might like Brazil. It's more of a 1984 movie, but it's it's the best 1984-ish movie I think that there's out. All right, Dakota, now let's get into our ratings. How many stars out of 5 will you give 1995's Ghost in the Shell?
I think 4.5.
I give it a solid 4.5 too. Okay. Maybe upon rewatches that grows up to a 5.
Same here. I'm trying to think. Again, torn between 4.5 and the 5.
So yeah, definitely at least a 4.5. It teeters up though.
Okay. Maybe I should break it. Maybe 5. I'm gonna be the one. It's a 5.
There you go. So yeah, thank you for listening today, everybody. Make sure to check us out on YouTube and Spotify and wherever else you get podcasts. We also have a Patreon now, so a Patreon account now, and that link's in the description. So wherever you people can put in to support us. I know it's economic crisis right now, so we might not get a lot of action on that Patreon right away, but no expectations though, because we do this for the love of it, and it's honestly kind of fun,
But we could, we could get better cameras. We could do things with it. So
we could get better camoras. In our hopes and dreams, I could quit my job.
Right. That's everybody's dream. To be able to quit their job, watch movies for a living.
Have a good day, everybody. Peace.